My Father is omnipotent, and that you can't deny. A God of might and miracles, 'tis written in the sky. Though here his glory has been shown, we still can't fully see the wonders of his might, his throne. 'Twill take eternity. It took a miracle to put the stars in place. It took a miracle to hang the world in space. But when he saved my soul, cleansed and made me whole, it took a miracle of love and grace. The Bible tells me of his power and wisdom all the way through, and every little bird and flower are testimonies too. It took a miracle to put the stars in place. It took a miracle to hang the world in space. But when he saved my soul, cleansed and made me whole, it took a miracle of love and grace. Repeat that, repeat that. It took a miracle to put the stars in place. It took a miracle to hang the world in space. But when he saved my soul, cleansed and made me whole, it took a miracle of love and grace. Yes, saints, it took a miracle to save me. I thought I was all right, working out there, had a good job, thought I was doing all right, going to college, and one day the Lord called me. He called me by my name and told me that the end was near. That's been almost 60 years ago. And I haven't always been walking like I should have walked because of the trials and the tribulations in life. But I really got serious with the Lord somewhere around 1983. I got really serious because God got serious. If you draw near to the Lord, he'll draw near to you. Let's put it that way. I thank God for his care. I thank him most of all for that grace. That's some amazing grace, saints. And I'm enjoying the fellowship that I have with him. I want to call your attention to the second chapter of the book of Exodus this morning. The second chapter of the book of Exodus. Old Testament, Old Testament. And I'm going to begin reading at the first verse. That's the second chapter of the book of Exodus, the going out of the land of captivity. Second chapter of Exodus. I'm going to begin reading at the first verse. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and dabbed it with slime and with pitch and put the child therein. And she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. And her maidens walked along by the river's edge. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse for the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew. And she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. For she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." I just want to look just a little further down. There is a line here that I wanted. And the line is that she called, that's the 8th verse, and the maid went and called the child's mother. The title of the sermon, Called the Child's Mother. Called the child's mother. I pray that you would cut your cell phone off. Called the child's mother. Not only do I want you to have your fingers on Exodus, but I also would that you would turn to the book of Acts, the 7th chapter, the 22nd verse. Acts, the 7th chapter, 22nd verse. You don't have to read that yet. And Hebrews, the 11th chapter and the 24th verse. I just want to get you prepared to hear the sermon, Called the Child's Mother. This is the story of Moses, the beginning of the lawgiver for the people of God, the Hebrew people. But one of the interesting things is that Moses' mother, Jochebed, that's her name. It doesn't give it here, but her name is mentioned. A man of the Levi took a wife, a daughter of Levi. One of the things we look at when we look at Moses and behind the scene is that his mother was of the tribe of Levi. Not only was she of the tribe of Levi, but also her husband. One of the things that we need to note here real quickly is that it's good to be equally yoked. Husband and wife of the tribe of Levi. That's an understanding. They know their positions in God. It's one of the great failures of our marriages is that we are so unequally yoked. One may be in the world and the other be in the church. It just doesn't work out, Or if both of them in the world, they're going to have some hardship trying to get along with one another because the world has such an influence on marriages. But anyway, they were of the house of Levi, which just means that they knew their place in God. They took on a role, the Levites took on a role to take care of the house of God. They were ushers in the house of God. They took care of what we call, they were guards of the house of God. They also was in charge of moving the tabernacle or the Ark of the Covenant. They also were responsible for all of the, what we may call the altars, the vessels, the lampstands, the tables. All of these things were in the tabernacle. And the tabernacle at this time was a moving tabernacle. They did not have a permanent place. It was a tent, a tabernacle, if you will, whereby the glory of God, even in this Egypt land where they were for over 430 years, and lots of those years were spent in slavery. And this is one of the reasons why we have a Moses, is because he's going to become a strong deliverer. But Jochebed, his mother, she understood her place in God. Took a husband that was of the same lineage, tribe of Levi. Somebody who knew how to take care of the house of God. And because she was obedient and going to marriage and marrying within the realm of those who love the Lord, and this is very important, saints of God, not to be unequally yoked, but also to serve God together. Serve God together. There is no limit to how you can serve God. You may think that was a small thing, caring for the house of God, caring for the things of God. Folk don't understand that everything that comes into the house of God has been prayed for. Hello, somebody. Chairs been prayed for, sound system prayed for, altar, all of these things, organ, drums, everything has been prayed for. You may say, well, you pray for them, but still people come break in churches and still... Yes, but God got their name and got their number. Oh, I hope you follow me this morning. I'm just trying to tell you the power of God goes beyond what you can see and hear. God deals with a man forever. Folk don't understand that, but I'm trying to make you realize that you have an eternal soul. And when we do things wrong, we're going to answer for them. Well, anyway, they were raising a family in this land called Egypt, and Pharaoh was very angry with them because one of the things that God had done was to increase the numbers of the Hebrews. They came down with 70 into the land, from out of the land of Canaan. They came down to Egypt with about 70 members of the family, including Joseph. But now they had grown and they had enlarged themselves. Their population had increased. And Pharaoh looked around and saw all these Hebrews. He said, my goodness, if an enemy came in, they could align themselves with the enemy and they could overthrow us. First thing we're going to do is make them slaves. Burden them with slavery work. Didn't work because God still increased their numbers. Saints, in the face of all kinds of adversity, if you trust God, God will increase your numbers. Well, what do you mean increase the numbers? Just numbers 1, 2, 3? No, he'll increase your influence. He'll increase the role that you play in the nation's history. I'm just trying to tell you, God is a good God. So that didn't work. So Pharaoh said, well, look, what we're going to do, we're going to kill these Hebrew boys. When they are born, I want them midwives to kill those boys. Every child that's a boy, kill them. You know, when you cut off the male, you cut off you cut off the production line, the reproduction line. You cut them off. And they wanted to kill all the males. That didn't work either. And Pharaoh actually inquired, why aren't you killing these Hebrew boys? And the answer he got from the midwives is that these Hebrew women, they can have these babies. These Hebrew women, the way they have them babies, you don't know whether it's a boy or a girl. And by the time it's already born, it's a boy. They just have them too fast. That's because God knows something about the womb. Is that right, saints? Then Pharaoh became even more vicious. He said, okay, you can't kill him coming out of the womb. I tell you what, everyone that's born a male, you drown them in the river. Can you imagine that? What a mean ruler this was. What a horrible man Pharaoh was. But we see that Moses, his mother, Jochebed, she was in touch with the Lord. God gave her a strategy on how to preserve her son, on how to raise her family, on how to preserve his life. As Moses is writing this, he said that she made a basket and she patched it up. She daubed it with all kinds of waterproof mud and all kinds of things to keep it afloat. And she put it in the bulrushes. And when Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe herself and her maidens, they saw the little basket with the baby floating. Isn't that wonderful? So number one, a point of this story, called the child's mother, Jochebed, is that when we walk, or when mothers and fathers, I should conclude father, but when mothers walk by faith and not by sight, God will save our children. I hope y'all hearing me this morning. When we learn to trust God, that's one of the things that we don't do. We don't trust God with our children. We trust everything else. We trust the institution called school. We trust institutions, dance schools, all kinds of institutions for learning and all kinds of institutions for training, but we don't trust God with our children. I'm not just talking about bringing them to church. I'm talking about training them in that home. Opening that Bible when they can learn. Look, they don't need to know how to read, but give them picture books, those illustrated picture books of Bible stories. Let them fall in love with the heroes that are in the Bible. There's some real heroes in this Bible. One of them that I honor, that I love, was Samson. When I heard the story of Samson, boy, I went wild. And when I heard the story of Solomon, it calmed me down. I said, what a wise man that was. But when we walk by faith, when we don't see our way out, we see that we're born in slavery. We see that we are having hardship. We see where they're killing our babies or killing our children. We still have to look to God. You have to look to God. So Moses knew who he was. He knew his mother. He knew his father. But because God was delivering him, he grew up in Pharaoh's house. Isn't that wonderful? Now, let me tell you something about Pharaoh's house. Egypt was one of the greatest countries on the face of the earth at this time. Science, literature, mathematics, architecture, music. All of these things were just exponentially greater than other countries. One of the things about nations that make them great is their arts. Yeah, they become great. And sometimes we're drawn to the arts. And of course, Moses was growing up and being inundated with all the knowledge, mathematics, understanding. Turn to Acts chapter 7. Real quick, I'm just going to show you something. Acts chapter 7. Moses is even in the New Testament and the Old Testament. When you see any of these leaders, any of these people that are in Old Testament as well as New Testament, you better read and read and read, because there's something for us to learn. This is the Acts 7th chapter and the 22nd verse. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. Moses was a prince in Egypt. Isn't that something what God can do for you? then that is not unusual for God to take a slave and make him a leader of a nation that held them slaves, because he did the same to Joseph. He did the same. Joseph was even in jail, but God brought him out, and God raised him up with knowledge and wisdom in all things. Your children having difficulty getting to school, you got to let them know that God is the giver of knowledge. God is the giver of wisdom. But it just doesn't come automatically. You got to go after God. You got to go after God. You got to go after God with all fervor, with all your energy. Learning a child how to pray and what to pray for and who to call on when trouble comes. So he grew up in a royal family. Some of this information I'm gathering is from Philo and from Josephus. These are writers and these are historians that knew about the Jewish people. I think Josephus got a book called The Antiquities. You should get that book and read it. It'll take you a lifetime sometime to get through it. That's if you're interested in biblical history and the history of the Hebrews. Even talks about Jesus. But anyhow, Pharaoh had made him his son because it was his grandson, because it was his daughter who adopted him. And he was in that castle, or he was in that Pharaoh's luxury living. He was enjoying himself, growing up with all the knowledge and understanding everything at his whim. He was even the heir to Pharaoh's throne. They said Moses led Egypt's army in victorious battles. This was all before he was 40 years old. Joined them and fought them against the Ethiopians. Not only that, when Moses came through the streets of Egypt, he was armed and he had armed guards. And they would cry out, "Get out of his way. Get out of his way. Kneel down," because he was a prince. And they honored him. They honored him. Bow your knee. Bow your knee. And here's a Hebrew now getting all this respect because of mother's prayer, mother's faith in God. And not only that, let me also say that Mother Jochebed, not only did she have Moses, but she had children before Moses. She had a son named Aaron. Aaron was the high priest. And not only that, she had a daughter who was a priestess, Miriam. I'm telling you, not only will your baby child be blessed, but all your children will be blessed. And not only that, your husband will be blessed, and you'll be blessed. Trust God. Trust God. Trust the Lord. As I move along here, you ought to teach your children about God. You ought to take time, because your faith in God can cause your children, again, to be delivered from premature death and destruction. Oh, these children who are dying around here, you hear their ages and all of the things that are happening to young people. It's because the devil want to have his way with our children. We have let the devil fool us into thinking that this world is the answer to our troubles. This world is not the answer. You must have faith in God, and you must teach your children the same kind of faith. See, faith moves from heart to heart, from breast to breast. You get close to your children. You find out what they're doing. Oh, come on, saints of God. Jochebed, she understood and knew. Even though Moses was in the Pharaoh's house, she knew she had done her job. She had raised him up for those years, and she went on and let him be in Pharaoh's house. But he knew who he was, and we know he knew what he was, because when we turn back to the book of Exodus, we see that something happened. In the 11th verse of the second chapter, it said, "It came to pass as Moses was growing up." It said when Moses was grown, full-grown man at this time, had to be at least 30 years old. When Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren. He knew who his brethren was. And looked on their burdens. He was watching the Hebrews work. saw their burdens, how they were carrying all of those loads, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way. And when he saw there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Moses was something, wasn't he? Most of us would be too afraid to do anything, but Moses looked both ways to see if anything was around, and Moses slew that Egyptian. Come on, saints of God. We knew Moses felt a guilty feeling because Moses was sneaky. He looked and see if anybody was watching and slew the Egyptian. And the 13th verse says, when he went out the second day, behold, two men of the Hebrews, they strove, or they were arguing with one another. And he said unto the one that did wrong to his brother, he said, wherefore do you smite your brother? Why do you smite him? I guess the Hebrew looked at him and said, who are you? Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Intendeth thou, is your intent to kill me like you did the Egyptian? When Moses heard that, Moses said, I got to get out of here. Because if Pharaoh heard that I killed an Egyptian, he gonna kill me. And of course, Moses left Egypt, about 40 years old, it said, and he went to Midian. And when he went to Midian, God blessed him. God blessed him that he met a wife. You ought to read the story, but I got to wrap it up. I want to give you some facts. Not only did Moses leave and Moses got married, but there were some troubles in Moses' life. There are always trouble in your life. You're going to have trouble in this world. We have to tell our children, we have to let them know that there's going to be times of trouble. Why, Mama, why do I need the Lord? Because there are going to be some troubles that you can't handle. There are going to be some days where the sun don't shine. There are going to be some days of rain. And if you live through some hard times, there are going to be days you won't have food on the table. Anybody know them days? Be days when you don't have the clothes that you want to wear, the car you want to drive, the house you want to live in. But do you know God will supply your every need? But you got to trust in God. You got to give God every problem that you have in life. Moses had a lot of problems. One of the things that we want to do is move to Hebrews 11 at this time. Try to wrap this up. I'm not going to keep you here too long. But Hebrews 11th chapter. Let's see what the Hebrews has to say about Moses. Now, I told you, when you find Moses all through this Bible, you're going to say, wow, he must have been a great man, and he was. So we look at the 24th verse of the 11th chapter. It says, by faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. At some time he had to leave there, and we saw that. Choosing rather, now listen to this, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Saints, I'm not telling you there's no pleasure out here in sin. I'm not telling you there's no pleasure out here going and ripping and running and doing the things that you want to do in life. There is pleasure in sin. But look at the 26th verse. He esteemed, that means he lifted up the reproach of Christ. Now, Christ wasn't even born back then, but Christ means Messiah. The reproach of Messiah, you got to look at Jesus. Greater than the riches and treasuries that laid in Egypt. For he had respect unto the recompense of reward. He's not looking at things in this life as being his reward, but he's looking to seeing God and being with God. Says there's more to life than just living down here. If it was, C'est la vie. We can just say, so goes life. We have no cares, no worries, because this life is over, that's it. But it's not so. Moses had enough vision. His mother taught him, Jochebed taught him that there is more to life than just living down here. There are more valuable things than silver and gold, wealth untold. There's more valuable things than that. By faith, he believed. He forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. For he endured as seeing him who is invisible. You don't see God, saints. God is a spirit. So the mother's faith in God allowed her child to suffer the reproach, just like Christ. Even all of the trouble, the vicissitudes of life, he was able to go through and take them. Now, there's a lot more that has happened to Moses, but I'm talking about his mother today. Let me give you a little bit more facts on Jochebed. Her father was a Levi. Husband was a Levi. They were descendants of Jacob, son Levi. So she was Hebrew all the way. Hello, somebody. Not only that, her name means glory of God. Names mean something. Sometimes we give our children names that don't mean nothing. But you ought to give them a meaningful name. She was the mother of 3 prophets. I think I told you that. Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. Moses was a prophet. One thing about Moses I need to tell you. Moses, even though Aaron was a prophet, even though Miriam was a prophet, even though there were other Kohites and other prophets, they were different. Moses' relationship with God was different. Well, what do you mean, preacher? Moses' relationship with God was so deep that he and God talked face to face. They called Moses a friend of God. Well, what do you mean a friend? That means when God came to see Moses, God spoke to Moses face to face. You may say, well, I thought you can't see God. No, you can't see God, but you can sure feel his presence. You can sure feel God's presence. You can feel his presence. Saints, you can feel his presence right now. When you know him and who he is, you can feel his presence. Moses, not only that, these are some things that relate to Moses. Moses had to turn fully to God. I told you, even in my own life, there are point in time in your life when you got to fully give up the world and turn to God. You got to make a choice. Am I going to be in the world or in church or in with Jesus and with God? Am I going to serve the Lord? There was also a blood atonement. There was a blood atonement. There was a covenant made between Moses and God. Moses was the lawgiver to Israel. Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights on consecutive terms. No other human did that. Go 40 days without food and water, and then another 40 days? Come on, saints, you died sometime in that first 40 days. If not, you're going to definitely leave out of here in that second 40-day fast. But God is able to keep us. God is able to keep us through some hard times. Not only that, Moses was fasting and was a faster, but Moses also showed that he exercised some control over the sea, over water. He brought the children of Israel out on dry land, yet they had to cross a sea. But the sea was dry because he had God's attention. And God can do some great things to a man that gives himself to the Lord. When I say great things, say, don't think that you're going to be Moses, but just think you're going to be a leader in your household and in your family and in your community. Come on, somebody. Sometimes we have to overcome the sins in our own life. Sometimes we have to overcome difficulties in our own family circle. God will help us. Not only that, but Moses' face changed. As you get closer to God, you're going to change too. Moses had a radiant face. So did Jesus. Radiant face, whereby they're bright and shiny. The people couldn't even look at Moses. Moses come down from the mountain. They say, "Oh, Moses, we need sunshades or something. You're so bright. You spend some time with the Lord, you're going to get bright." He endured murmurings, how people talk about you behind your back. Come on, saints. People will talk about you. You try to do good and try to help somebody, and they will still tear you down. But when you love somebody, when you learn how to love people, I don't care what you say about me, I'm still going to love you. I don't care what you do to me, I'm still going to love you. It's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard to do. But with God, you can overcome. I'm finished. One more thing I want to tell you. You know, Moses died, but they saw Moses after his death, did they not? The Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus up there, and there go Elijah, there go Moses, and of course, that was the lawgiver and the prophet along with Jesus. And Peter wanted to build an altar to all three of them, and they disappeared. One of the things, Moses' time was over. But this is the time for Jesus. This is the time for us to get right with the Lord. This is the time for us to give ourselves over to the Spirit of God. And he's here now. And he's able to help us to overcome the situations that we're in our own lives. Sometimes you preach about folk that are in the Bible and say, well, that's in the Bible. But we are talking about our own lives. There's anybody here who's been touched by the message of Jochebed, Moses' mother, who had a great influence on his life, who was able to see God and understand that she and her husband had a connection into God and raising godly children. Come on, saints of God. Don't you want to raise godly children? Just raise your hand right where you are. I don't care how tangled up and wrapped up you are in the world or whatever that's going on in your life. I'm telling you, God is able. Called the child's mother. Called her. Why don't we just call on Jesus? Is that right? Father, in the name of Jesus, here we are, on Mother's Day of 2023. Calling on you to help us right early. We need you, Lord. Our children, Lord, they need deliverance. Not only they, but we do need deliverance. Deliver our souls, oh God. Help us, oh God, to study your word. Help us, oh God, to walk with you, to talk with you. Help us to see you as a friend. We need you, Jesus. Bless us right now. Straighten out the crooked in our lives. We repent from everything that's not like you, Lord, right now in the name of Jesus. Anything that's not like you, we repent from it right now. Forgive us. Help us to turn our lives around to you and do for us what no other power can do. Help us to raise our families. Help us to keep our homes together. Help us, oh Lord, even if we have to build new lives, help us to build it on solid ground. Sometimes we get married, we have to marry again because of the vicissitudes of life. But we thank you that you are able to help us. Not that we condone it. We sometimes when we leave one, we just stay out of them all and just be a single person and live unto thee, oh God, because you're the object of our affection. In Jesus' name we do pray and give thanks. Called the